Alright, so in this video, we're going to talk about VBA arrays and how do you create user-defined functions that basically spill the data like dynamic array functions. So in Excel, see, I had this question, how do you create functions similar to like filter, rand array, sequence, sort, unique functions that basically produce dynamic arrays that are now available in Office 365. And basically the second question is, which is sort of related to the first one, is how do you create a single function that can split first, middle, and last names using a function like this, like a UDF. So the short answer to this is that it is possible, and the way you do it, you need to create a function that returns an array. So as a basic example, just for this sort of function, if we do like sequence and we do like 4 rows, 2 columns, and let's just do it like this and hit enter. See how this one function returns this entire result of arrays? Basically, this is what we call spill, basically a single function that returns a bunch of stuff. So the first thing we need to do, we need to understand VBA arrays and their structures. And working with VBA arrays is not that easy most of the time, unfortunately, but it's also not the worst thing in the world, I guess. Let's go to our Visual Basic editor under Developer. Right here, we have our editor. I already have a module. If you didn't have one, you can do right-click, insert module. So the first thing I want to do here, I want to show you how to create an array in VBA. And the first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to create a basic subroutine. So I'm going to say sub ABCD. And basically an array is a variable that can contain multiple values in it. And you can have single dimensional arrays or multi-dimensional arrays. So for example, let me create a variable here. I'm going to call it names. And I'm going to make it equal to an array. Inside of this, I'm just going to do a few arguments. I'm going to do Anna, Bob. I guess these are not arguments really. This is really elements in our array or something, but it doesn't really matter. So as you can see right now, I have this comma-separated list in this array called names. Let's just call it something else because this seems to be a reserved keyword. There it is. So now in this, if I wanted to access different parts in this people variable, it starts with this first one. See Anna, then it's Bob, and then it's Elvis. So if I wanted to get right now Anna, I'm just going to do debug.print so we can get that printed out. And I'm going to do people 0. So right now, if I take this and I run this, see it prints Anna here. And that refers to this first element in this people variable in this array. So if I do people1, see that prints out Bob. I'm going to have to clear this to rerun this so you can see what happens. See, that's Bob. And if I clear this and do people3, that would be Elvis. Yeah, actually, that's not 3, that's 2. So 3 doesn't exist, so I get an error. So I have to do 2. Here we go. So the index here by default starts from 0 in VBA arrays. It's 0, 1, 2. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to start from 0 though. You can change where it actually starts. To do something like that, we have to first declare the array before we actually create this array. But before I do that, let me actually show you how do we replace something in this array too. So right now, if I do people1, which would refer to this Bob, and I'm going to make it equal to Joe, that should replace Bob with Joe. So at this point, if we print 1, that should return Joe because it should have been replaced in this array. So if I run this, see, it returns Joe. And we can also open the debugger to see this in a better way, I guess. So if we just do F8, so right now you can see we have this people variable right here in the bottom right. And you can see that currently that's empty, meaning there's nothing happening in there. So now I'm going to do F8 a couple of times. See, at this point, we've created this people array. And if I open this, you'll see we have 3 things. We have people 0, Anna, Bob, and Elvis. And at this point, if I run this other line, see how we replace that with Joe. So I'm going to reset this. So now let's say we don't want this array index to start from 0. We want it to start from 1. So to do something like that, we're going to go on top here and declare this variable first. I'm going to say dim people, and I'm going to say 1, 2, 3. So now I'm saying this is going to be an array, and it's going to start from position 1 and end at position 3. And then later on, we can do people 1 is Anna, people 2 is Joe, and people 3 is Olivia. So at this point, if I run this, see, it gives me Anna, because now we start the index from 1. And if I just do the debugger again, so you can see here, if I open this, now we declared right here that people is an array with 3 elements, starts from 1 to 3. If I open this, see, we get 1, 2, and 3, and all of them are empty right now. And now we kind of fill it up. So people 1, we're going to make it Anna, then we're going to make it Joe and Olivia. As you can see, here they are. So now at this point, we can just print one of those out. And if I try to do something like people 0, it would give me an error because there is no position 0. So usually you would also declare the type of these variables inside of this. So for example, if I do as integer, that would require these things to be numbers. So this would give me an error because I'm trying to make it a string. It's not a number. See, type mismatch error. That's what I'm getting. So this I could do like string, I guess, that would work out. Or I could do variant, where you could do different types of variables. So one of the things that's difficult to work with in VBA arrays, unlike, for example, if you work with JavaScript, is that once you declare a size for your array, it's very difficult to resize it to a different size. So if I decided that this array is going to have 3 things in it from 1 to 3, and later in my code, I decide to add another, like the 4th person, what I would have to do, I have to resize the array to make sure that it can actually contain 4 things instead of 3. And you can do that by doing this ReDim keyword. And basically, we're going to take that people, and we're going to say that should be, let's say, from 1 to 4, right? Now let's see what happens when we try to do this, right? So I'm going to do an F8. And what's going to happen is we're going to get this error because we already declared that this is going to have 3 things in it. And there's no way to take that and resize if you have declared how many things you're going to have in your array. So if you want to be able to resize your array, what you need to do when you declare your array, you need to make sure you don't provide a size. Something like this. So I'm going to leave this empty when I do this. And at this point, if I get to this, this is going to give me an error because it's not going to be able to put these things in there because it needs to know it can have like 4 things in it. So let me show you an example of that. So if I run this, see, it says out of range because right now we're trying to put something in this people array, but we didn't say how many things. So by default, it has nothing. So it has 0 elements that you can have in it. So we get an error. However, since by declaring this way of this array, I did it this way, I can go below this and I can do this. And now if I run this, see, it lets me take this array that was not originally sized and resize it to this 1, 2, 3 size array. So if I open this people, see there are 3 positions here that are empty. And then I can fill those up with those names. And then I'm going to run this one. And you can see I was able to then run this line and again resize the array. However, if I open this array, you'll see that everything in the array is empty. So when I do this resizing of the array, I lose all the stuff that was in the array to begin with. So if you don't want to be able to lose it, you can do this preserve keyword. So as you can see, we got this 3. So if I open this people right now, we have 3 of them. And if I run this line and I look inside of this, you'll see I still have the people in there and we have fourth position, which is currently empty, which we could technically go in here and fill up with something else. So we can go here and do people 4 equals to, at this point, Linda or something. So this should allow us now to start with 3 things in our array, and then after we fill it up, add another thing to this array and put Linda in here. Now this preserve is fine. The problem with this preserve, it doesn't let you actually change all the dimensions in your array if you have multi-dimensional array. Now in this case, when we have a single dimensional array, this whole thing seems to work fine, no problem. Now let me show you an example of more than one dimensional array. Let's say we have, again, a subroutine. And on this one, I'm going to declare an array again. And this time, I'm going to do 2-dimensional array instead of 1-dimensional array. So let's resize this. And we're going to do 2 dimensions. The first one is going to go, let's say, 1 to 3. And then for the second one, I'm going to do 1 to 2. And I'll do as variant to have basically any type of variables in those. So now if I just run this thing as is, by the time I ran this, if I open this, you'll see that we have this population 1, 2, and 3. And each one of those, if I open this, has 2 things in it. See, 1, 1, and 1, 2. Then 2, 1, 2, 2. Then 3, 1, 3, 2. So this is now a 2-dimensional array. So a good way to visualize it, even though it's not necessarily working that way, but very easy way to visualize it is your spreadsheet as a grid. So what I mean by that, if I had some data here in my spreadsheet, something like this, what this would mean is that we have an array that has 2 rows and 3 columns. So in this case, this would be row 1, this is row 2, and this will be column 1, column 2, column 3. So if I wanted to recreate something like this, then I would have to do 1 to 2, because the first one is going to be the rows, and then do 1 to 3 to do 3 columns. So now at this point, we could fill this up by saying population 1, 1. So that would be the first row, first column, equals to, so if I look inside of this, see that would be this A. So I'm just going to say A. And then the same sort of thing, right? So I'm going to copy and paste this. So now if I wanted to target this second column in the first row, that would be the first row, column 2. So in here, it would be 1, 2, like this. And then the third column would be 1, 3. And this would be this B and C going to the right. So I'm going to do B and I'm going to do C. And then if I want to go to the next row, then these first ones are the row numbers. So this is going to change to 2. And this is a column number. So 2, 1, then 2, 2 to go second row, second column. And then finally 2, 3, second row, third column. And then to fill up the arguments, a D, E, F. So that's going to go here. D, E, and F. And that should populate this array with our data. So let's just do F8 to get to this. So if I do F8 to get to the end of this, I open this population in here. See, we have this population 1, which is the first row. See, A, B, C, first, second, third columns. And then we have the second row, D, E, F. So this is the way the array needs to be structured if you want to be able to put this in a spreadsheet. So let me just get rid of all of this. And let's try to now put that in here. So the range we have here is from C2 through E3. So I'm going to go here and do range. Let's just do it right. C2 through E3, right? From here through here. The value in that range, dot value, needs to be equal to that population. So now I'm taking this array and putting inside of this range. So let's try to run this code and see if that actually places this values over here. So that was this macro. And as you can see, it was able to write that entire array to this range right here in our spreadsheet. This array doesn't have to really start from 1. So we could have started from 0. And if we start from 0, then this will go to 1. So if we have 2 rows, the first row will be 0, the second row will be 1. And then for 3 columns, we can start 0 and go to 2, 0, 1, 2. And then that means this 1 is going to be 0. It's the first row. And this 2 is going to be 1 in this case. And then instead of 1, 2, 3, we go 0, 1, 2. And then again for the second row, the same thing. So right now, if I just do an F8 until I get to this, if I open this population, you'll see we got population 0, the first row. If I open it, it has 3 columns. And then we have population 1, the second row, that has 3 columns. By the way, if you don't have this locals window, you can find it under view and then locals window right here. That's how you could get to that. And this below is immediate window right here. And then if I run this, I should still be able to put that array in this range. So it doesn't really matter if you start from 0 or from 1 or whatever. The main thing here is that this range size needs to match the size of the array you got. So if I'm doing this range that goes from C2 through E3 and it has 2 rows and 3 columns, I have to make sure that my array results have again 2 rows and 3 columns to match that. Otherwise, you're going to get an error because the sizes don't match. So that brings us to our functions and how do we make a function that dynamically spills the results. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to create a function. So this time I'm not going to create a subroutine below. I'm going to create a function. So I'm going to do function and I'm going to call this ABCD, just the name of this function. Assuming this is going to be my function, I need this function to return an array in order to have this dynamically spilling results. So I'm just going to copy this thing that I just did. I'm skipping this range value part. Let me make this window a little bigger. So basically what we're doing here is that, again, we declare a variable as an array with this parentheses. You have to make sure you do this parentheses, otherwise it's not going to know this is an array. And then we resize it to whatever size it needs to be. And then we put all the values in their positions. And then once the values are populated in those positions, we can just go below this and make sure we return that array back. And the way we would do that, we would make this name of the function, which is ABCD, equal to that array that we've created, which is population. So this function name, see, should be equal to this. So this is like VBA's way to say return this. So now we have this function called ABCD, which means if I go to my spreadsheet and let's just get rid of all of this and just do equals ABCD, which is that function I've just created. See, it auto-populates and close parentheses. There are no arguments that I said this function accepts. So we're just going to close this, hit enter. So apparently I get an error. Maybe there's an existing function ABCD or something. Let's go rename this to something else. I'm just going to call it ABCD spill. Something like this. So let's go back and try to do this. There we go. Just have to use a function name that I'm allowed to use apparently. There we go. So you can see how this one function spills this entire array right in here. And we could have done that over here too, right? So if I do ABCD spill right here, see, it just places this array over here. Now it's just going to automatically spill across the area that it needs to go. So that means we could have done this, and then we could have another column in here. So let me just do that. And this will be the second row, so that's 1. And column 3, which is really 4. starting from 0, something like this. So now if I go back and rerun this, see, it also returns that fourth column. So it automatically just spills the results in this way. So that's really how you create a user-defined function that will return a dynamic array. You simply just create a function like this, and then you return the array back, and Excel will handle spilling the results for you. Usually the challenge is going to be, how do you get whatever it is you need this function to do to this particular shape so you can spill those results and return the results back so it works. Now, the reason that might not be very easy to do sometimes is because you sometimes want to build your array dynamically. And if you remember when I was talking about resizing this array, this resizing only works for one of your dimensions. It doesn't work to resize all dimensions if you have a multi-dimensional array, and that's where you start having issues with this. So let me give you some challenges that you might face, because that could be really irritating when you start working with arrays. So for example, if you remember, I got this thing that I started with nothing. I then did this 3 elements in this array, and then I populated those 3 elements. And then here I resized that array to include another person, and there we have it, right? Let me show you a problem. If we go to this second example right here, now we have this array going 0 to 1 and 0 to 2, right? Now let's say you plugged all of this in. I'm going to remove this part where we actually put it in a spreadsheet. And let's say you decided to add another row to this array. Now you're thinking, okay, so we're going to do ReDim Preserve, and we're going to take that population and we're going to make it 0 to 2. And the second one, the columns, we're going to keep the same. So it's still 0 to 2. And then at this point, we should have another row available to be able to populate in this populations array. So let's try to run this and see what happens. So I'm going to do F8. So far, let's take a look what we got here. I didn't run this line yet. If I look at this population, see, we have the first row, it has 3 columns. We have the second row, it has 3 columns. Now we're expecting to run this line and resize this. As you can see, I'm not able to do that. So it doesn't let me resize this array. What's interesting, however, is that if I tried to do something like this, I'm going to keep the first one the same, and I'm going to resize the second one. I will have to rerun this. So you can see I still get this 2 rows, 3 columns. Now let's try to rerun this again. And if I look here, you'll see I didn't get an error, and I did get an extra column in this. And that's the thing. When you use preserve keyword in here, it will only allow you to change the last dimension in your array. In this case, see, that would be our columns. So we can add more columns to this, but we're not going to be able to add more rows, which is this first dimension in this array. Which means if you wanted to add more rows, you cannot preserve the data to do this. So what you would have to do, you would have to just ReDim without preserve, which means when you do that, it will lose all the data you had in this array. See, right now, if I look at this, it will have all this data. But now if I run this line without preserve, it will let me resize it. Well, actually, I should probably change it to the other example when I'm resizing the rows so you can see how that works. So this was the one that failed with preserve because we're trying to resize the first dimension instead of the second one. So if I run this and I look here in this population, see, we got those 2 rows with 3 columns. And if I run this line, now it didn't fail. However, if I open that population, you'll see that what happened here is that I lost all the data that was in the array. So now we have to repopulate this array all over again with this data from start to end. So I would have to redo all of this here. And then in addition to that, I would have to then add. So this would be 2, 2, 2. And just keep it simple. I'm just going to say 1, 2, 3. Here we go. Now we have 3 rows in this array. Those are the challenges you're going to face. See, when you try to dynamically change the size of the array, what it means that if you're changing anything other than the last dimension of the array, you would have to repopulate the whole array again and make basically a copy of the whole thing in order for this to work. That's why basically what you want to do usually, you want to know how many things you're going to have in this array before you actually declare the array to begin with. All right, so that's that. And the last thing I'm going to show here is that, let's just get rid of all of this. When you declare it this way, and then you resize your array, these numbers could actually be variables as well. So I can go here and say I equals 2, and then I can put I in here when I decide to resize this array. And this would still work. See, I get my array with 3 columns, 2 rows based on this. You cannot do this, however, if you try to declare the array with a variable. So if I try to do this over here, and I put this on top, let's just comment out this line. If I try to run this, see, I get an error. Because when you do this declaration, you're not allowed to use these variable names in this. But you can use it when you resize it. So that's why most of the time when you declare this, you just declare them like this, and then you decide how you're going to resize it. Okay, so hopefully this gives you some base understanding about arrays in VBA. So I'm going to try to get to the second question as a follow-up video on this. How do we take now this and build an array function that will basically just give us first, middle, and last names automatically spilled using one function. But for this one, that should be it. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.